Hello everyone and welcome to Byjus Exam Prep IAS. Today we are here with the second session on environment and ecology in the knowledge series. And today we are going to take up a very important area of environment and ecology which has been crucially important from the perspective of your examination. And you will see that there are multiple questions that have been asked from this area. Even if you look at the 2022 prelims paper, you will see that there is one question that has been asked on wetlands. Very recently, if you just look into the newspapers of this week itself, you'll see that Ramsar sites again have been in the news. And why exactly have they been in news? Because what India wants is that the number of Ramsar sites that we have in India, it should be increased from the current number, that is 49, to 75. And 75 being a significant number because we are in the 75th year of our independence. And this year we are going to celebrate this 75th year of independence, and that's why the government of India also wants to make sure that the number of wetlands that we have which can be covered under Ramsar sites be also increased to 75. So that's why this was something which was in the news this week itself. So let's try to understand here in this particular session, what do we mean by Ramsar sites, where did this exact concept come from, and why exactly are Ramsar sites important. Here first we'll discuss about the Ramsar sites, the criteria for Ramsar sites, etc. And in the second half of today's lecture, what we are going to discuss is about wetlands, because Ramsar sites basically are about wetlands. So we'll try to understand what wetlands are, how do we define a wetland, and also what are the basic importance that we have for wetlands, why are they important for us. So this is what the basic crux of today's lecture would be. So let's start with the lecture. So first thing is, when we look at a Ramsar site, what do we understand by a Ramsar site? How do we define a Ramsar site? So Ramsar site is a wetland site designated to be of international importance, and these wetlands are protected under the strict guidelines of the Ramsar Convention on Wetlands. So what are we talking about? We are saying that we are talking about wetlands. What do we mean by wetlands? Let's hold on to this and we'll have a discussion on wetlands on the second half of our lecture. So what we are saying is that a Ramsar site is a wetland, and a wetland which is of significance in variety of ways. There are multiple criteria, and if any one of these criteria are being fulfilled by any wetland, then in that case it might be recognized as a Ramsar site. So that's why a Ramsar site is nothing but a wetland which becomes very important for one reason or the other. So the concept of a Ramsar site comes from where? It comes from something called as the Ramsar Convention. So what exactly do we mean by Ramsar Convention? It is an intergovernmental treaty for conservation and wise use of wetlands. Two important terms, conservation and wise use. And this is something which is very crucial when it comes to wetlands. That is, it is not only about the conservation of these wetlands, but at the same time it is also about wise use, or how to derive ecological services from these areas. How do we, and what are the various ways in which these can be sustainably important for us? The key word being sustainably, because what has been happening, and we have seen this over the past few years, and not rather only past few years, but rather I can say that past couple of centuries, since the time of the Industrial Revolution, we have seen that these wetlands, they have been shrinking in their area. If you just look at the numbers in last 300 years, estimates say that we have lost almost more than 85% to 87% of all the wetlands in the world. So from that perspective, when we look at these wetlands, it becomes all the more important for us to look at the ways in which we can conserve them, because conservation steps have to be taken to ensure that they survive. And why their survival is important is something that we are going to understand. So that's why it provides the framework, or the Ramsar Convention provides the framework for national action and international cooperation for the conservation and wise use of wetlands and their resources. Why is it called as Ramsar Convention? Because it was conducted at Ramsar, Ramsar being a city where in Iran. So this is where it was conducted back in 1971, and that's why it has been named as Ramsar Convention. And what Ramsar Convention basically does is that it identifies the wetlands. What is the basic purpose? Identification of the wetlands, and these wetlands can be designated as Ramsar sites. And once they have been designated as Ramsar sites, this is where they can be taken as, this is where we can take a lot of important steps to make sure that we can conserve these wetlands or conserve these important sites. So first and foremost, what are the criteria? How do we choose that what is a Ramsar site? What are the criteria that must be fulfilled, or if any one of these criterion, if they are fulfilled, then in that case we can say that it can be counted as a Ramsar site. So first and foremost, what are the criteria? There are 9 criteria that have been listed. Alright, there are 9 criteria that have been listed, and out of these 9 criteria, if any one, just remember this, it's not that all the 9, any one, if any one of these criteria are fulfilled, then in that case it can be counted as a Ramsar site. That wetland can be counted as a Ramsar site. What are the criteria? Just let's have a look at what these criteria are. First, it contains a representative, rare or unique example of natural or near natural wetland type found within the appropriate biogeographical region. So keywords are representative, rare or unique. And this is what you will see with many of these Ramsar sites, that many of these Ramsar sites that we are taking, or which have been the wetlands that have been taken as Ramsar sites, they are sites which are crucially important because of the kinds of species, whether plant or animal species, which are found there. So because of that, we see that they become very, very important. Now at the same time, another criteria that has been listed out is that it supports vulnerable, endangered or critically endangered species or threatened ecological communities. If this criteria is also fulfilled, and we have seen that many of these wetlands, they have very important and very unique kind of endemic species which are found only in that region, and they are not found in other areas. For example, let's say if we count Sundarbans. Alright, in case of Sundarbans, what we see is that you have the Royal Bengal tiger which is found in the Sundarbans. Now what is the speciality of this Royal Bengal tiger? Because it has to survive in a wetland, right? It has to survive in a wetland. So if you look at the structure of this tiger as compared to the other tigers which are found in other parts of the country, you'll see that they are unique, they are different, they are, even if you compare the weights of the Royal Bengal tiger as compared to the weight of any other tiger, you'll see that there is a difference there as well, because they have to survive in these wetlands. So that's why there are small changes here and there, because of which they can survive in these areas. So that's why they become crucially important from this perspective. Then it supports population of plants and animal species which are important for maintaining biological diversity. And this criteria, this third criteria, has been very, very important when it comes to all the Indian wetlands that we have, all the Indian Ramsar sites. Majority, or rather you can say the highest percentage of the Ramsar sites that we have in India, they basically are because of this third criteria. They fulfill the third criteria, and because of which we see that many of them, they have been counted as Ramsar site only because they fulfill the third criteria. Alright, so because they have important species of flora and fauna which are important for maintaining biological diversity. Then after that, there is the fourth criteria, that it supports plant or animal species at a critical stage in their life cycles, provides refuge during adverse conditions. And this is also very, very important, because it would be able to make sure that these kind of plants and animals, they are able to survive when it comes to these conditions, which can be very crucial, when it comes to the survival of the species, especially during the adverse conditions. All right. Then after that, regularly supports, another criteria, if it regularly supports 20,000 or more water birds, meaning that these kind of birds which are found in these kind of areas where you have water, you have, let's say, a kind of area where it can be in a inundated area or a wetland. So we'll discuss about that. And then after that, it supports 1% of the individual in the population of species or subspecies of water bird. Then, so again related to water bird, if at all this is condition, this condition is fulfilled, then this also becomes one of them. Then a large population or significant population of fish subspecies, if they are also found in this area, then in that case it can be designated as a Ramsar site. Then if it becomes an important source of food for, not for people but rather for the species which survive in or the fish species which survive in these kind of areas or the nearby areas, not only in the wetlands but in the areas which are near the wetlands. So that's why this is something that we can also see. Then regularly supports 1% of the individuals of the species which are non-avian animal species. So that also becomes one of the criteria. So just remember that there are these 9 criteria, and if any one of these 9 criteria are fulfilled, then in any of these cases it can be designated as a Ramsar site, or this wetland can be designated as a Ramsar site. And if you look at this figure, out of these 9 criteria, if we look at all the Indian Ramsar sites, this is on what basis they have been chosen as a Ramsar site. You will see that criteria 2 and criteria 3, these two become very important, because these two are the criteria where, because of which we have seen that a lot of Ramsar sites or a lot of wetlands have been designated as Ramsar sites. So because of which we see that these two become very crucial conditions. And apart from that, there are other conditions for which also we have seen that many of these wetlands have been designated as Ramsar sites. But remember that most important criteria, even if we speak from your examination perspective, would be criteria number 2 and criteria number 3, because these two are the criteria on the basis of which we see that almost 40% of our Ramsar sites come from these two criteria. So that's why these two criteria become crucially important for us. Now coming to the most important discussion of today's session, and that is on wetlands. Because when we talk about Ramsar sites, one thing that we have been talking about is the fact that Ramsar sites come from where? They are designated wetlands of international importance. Wetlands which are crucially important when it comes to their conservation, not only for conservation of these species, but also because of the ecological services that we derive out of these wetlands. So first and foremost, what is the definition of wetland? Now if you look at here, if you look at your screen, you will see that there are 2 definitions that I have listed out. Now these 2 definitions that I have listed out, these are the definitions. One, the first definition that you see is a definition given in the Ramsar Convention. That's the definition of a wetland according to the Ramsar Convention. And the second definition that you see is, you can say, a slight modification of the same definition, and this is the definition that has been adopted by the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change in India. So this definition, this is the definition given by the Ramsar Convention. This is given by the Ramsar Convention, and this definition, as you can see, this is the definition that has been given by Ministry of Forest, Environment, Forest and Climate Change in India. Now what's the difference between the two? If you look closely, what you will see is that the first part of these two are similar, correct? This is word to word similar when it comes to the first part of the definition. Then there are some exceptions that have been added by India. There are some exceptions that have been added. So these exceptions basically are additions to the definition of the wetlands that we have. So if you look at the definition, areas of marsh, fen, peatland or water, whether natural or artificial, permanent or temporary, with water that is static or flowing, fresh, brackish or salt, including areas of marine water and the depth of which at low tides does not exceed 6 meters. This is something that can be designated as wetlands according to Ramsar Convention. But if you look at the definition given by the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change, you will see that there are some areas or some things which have been excluded from the list of wetlands. So for example, if you see, they include does not include river channels, paddy fields, human-made water bodies or tanks specifically constructed for drinking water purposes, and structures specifically constructed for aquaculture, salt production, and recreation and agricultural purposes. So that's why these kind of human activities, you can say, related to agriculture, related to water for human consumption, related to paddy fields, again related to agriculture. So you'll see that all these things which have been constructed for human activities, these kind of areas will be excluded from the list of areas which can be called as wetlands. So this is basically what we are seeing here. Alright, so that's the basic difference in the definition that has been given for wetlands for by Ramsar Convention and by Ministry of Environment here in India. So in simple terms, if we have to put this, that what do we mean by wetlands? A simple definition would simply say that it is an area where you have a lot of water. The soil that you have here is hydric in nature, meaning that it is kind of saturated with water, and many of these areas will be areas where you have some kind of vegetation along with small amount of, or let's say some amount of water as well. So you can say that land and water, these two basically will be mixing in these kind of areas. They can be of fresh water, they can be in the marine areas, in the coastal areas, in the estuaries. We see that all these areas can be seen as wetlands. Now when we speak of wetlands, why exactly wetlands are important? So if you look at this figure, you will see that these are the areas which can be designated as wetlands, because these are areas, as I told you, that these are areas where land and water are mixing. So that's why you will see that some of these areas are inundated, some of these areas have small amount of water. So that's why these kind of areas can be designated as wetlands. So if we look at the wetland, or the some of the attributes that we see in wetlands, that if any one of these, let's say in any one of these criteria, if these are being fulfilled, then in that case wetlands, they can be called as wetlands. So that's why they predominantly support hydrophytes, meaning these kind of plants that can grow in these areas where you have a lot of water. Then the substrate is predominantly undrained hydric soil, and undrained meaning that these are areas from where sediments cannot simply be taken away very easily, which is the problem with many of the floodplains. And then the substrate is non-soil and is saturated with water or covered by shallow water at some time during growing season of each year. So in these cases, one of these criteria, if let's say any one of these criteria are fulfilled, then in that case we can say that it can be called as wetlands. Now when we look at wetlands in India, we see that there are a number of areas in India, there are a number of small and big areas in India which can be designated as wetlands, out of which there are 49 wetlands currently which have been designated as Ramsar sites. Apart from that, there are a list of another 26 that we have proposed, that is the government of India has proposed, that they should also be taken as a part of Ramsar sites. They should be included in the list of Ramsar sites. So in that case, if that happens, if that can be done very quickly, then in that case the number right now from 49 will jump to 75, and this is what we want to do this year itself, because as I said, this year also signifies the 75th year of our independence. So when we look at Ramsar sites, or the wetlands rather, in India, we see that there are some data which become very, very important, and these kind of data perhaps is something that you can use in your mains examination. That is the whole purpose why I have given this data here. Because let's say if you get a question based on mangroves, based on wetlands, based on any kind of wetlands in general, then in that case, if let's say the question is talking about wetlands in India or Ramsar sites in India, then in that case, if you can use these kind of figures and facts, then it also helps you also gain some respect from the examiner, because when the examiner is correcting the papers, there will be a lot of theoretical answers that they'll get. So in that case, if you have some of these data being also mentioned in your answer sheets, then in that case it gives an idea to the examiner that you have prepared better than many others. So that's why from the mains perspective, I'm not looking at this from prelims perspective, but rather from mains perspective, because if you can quote these data, it always helps you in the examination. Alright, so if you look at this, we see that over 1,52,600 square kilometer is what we have our wetlands, which accounts for almost 4.63% of the total geographical area of the country. out of which, if you see, river or streams, they occupy 52,600, reservoirs 24,800, intertidal mud flats at 24,100, 13,100 of tanks and ponds or lakes at 7,300 square kilometers. And in total, there are a number of different types of wetlands, although that is not important for you from examination perspective. And we see that there all out of all these, there are 19 types of wetlands that can be found in India. So that's why this is also a very important figure from that perspective. And when it comes to state-wise distribution, you'll see that Gujarat is at top with 34,700 kilometers of all the wetlands in the country. So that's why, and 22% of total wetland areas of the country is there in the state of Gujarat. So that's why these states, apart from Gujarat, Andhra Pradesh, Uttar Pradesh and West Bengal, these are also important states when it comes to wetlands. Now, finally, towards the end of the session, if we look at the Ramsar sites, if you see all these Ramsar sites, these are the areas which have been designated. So at present, as I told you, that in total we have 49 Ramsar sites, and this is the distribution of the Ramsar sites. Now, if you look at the importance of wetlands and why we want to increase the number of Ramsar sites from 49 to 76, we need to understand why Ramsar sites are important. And from that perspective, there are some of these points that you need to understand, that why we look at Ramsar sites and why we see that Ramsar sites are very, very important for us. So first and foremost, the first thing is that it provides fresh water. As you know that almost 97% of the water available on the earth is saline water, and fresh water is 3%. Out of which we see that only out of this 3% also, almost just 0.03% of this 3% is available for direct use for domestic consumption. And this is where having sources of fresh water becomes very, very important, and wetlands have been one of those sources. Wetlands have been one of those sources which have been used for groundwater recharge. Have been used for groundwater recharge. So that's why they become a very crucial source of fresh water for us. Then at the same time, they purify and filter harmful waste from water. And this is something which is also very, very important, because whether it is, let's say, fertilizers or pesticides or even heavy metals, all these basically can be filtered out by the wetlands. Even other kinds of toxins also, they all can be filtered out by the wetlands. And that's why, for this very reason, they are also called as the kidneys of the earth. You'll see that at some places it has been designated as kidneys of the earth because of this very reason, that they can help in this kind of filtration. So because they help in filtration, they help in filtration of water, they help in purification of water, and that is the reason why they have been designated as kidneys of water, kidneys of the earth. And fun fact, this is a question which was asked in this year's prelims examination. This year's prelims, this is something that was asked. Then they become a very, very important source of food as well. We see that they have become a very important source of food, because in the world we see that there are a lot of rice paddies which feed almost 3 billion people on the earth. So almost 3 billion people directly are dependent on these rice paddies. So that's why they also become very crucial sources. And because when we look at these areas become very crucial source for food, not only from the perspective of rice or these things that can be cultivated, but also even if you look at from the perspective of fish population. We see that a lot of commercial fish, they also actually grow in these kind of areas. So that's why because of commercial fish also growing in these areas, or I mean they use these areas for fertilization and laying their eggs, and because of which we see that estuaries and coastal wetlands, they become very, very crucial areas for fish cultivation and getting fish out of these areas. So that's why they also are very, very important from that perspective. Then biodiversity. So from the perspective of biodiversity also, we see that they are very, very crucial. We have seen that more than at least a lakh of species are found in these kind of areas. So that's why they become very, very important. There is, if I just lay down a fact, we have seen that almost in 1 decade, almost more than 270 to 280 species, new species were discovered in the wetlands in the Amazon forest. So that's why we know that these are very rich areas of biodiversity. So that's why their conservation becomes even more important from this perspective. Then they are also called as nature's sponges. And why are we calling them as nature's sponges? Because first of all, we'll see that they will absorb rain. Alright, they will absorb rainfall, and at the same time, after absorbing the rainfall, what we see is that they would provide a very wide pool. Alright, they would provide a very wide surface pool, for making sure that they can ease the flooding. This is something that can lead to easing of the floods. So from that perspective also they are important, because that's why we are saying that they will act as nature's sponges. And because of this also, they would be able to, at some places you can say that they can be used against droughts as well. They can be used against droughts. So they can be used against droughts, and they would be helpful from that perspective also. They would help in fighting climate change as well. How exactly will they help in fighting climate change? Because they are very good carbon sinks. They are very, very good carbon sinks. Some of the data also says that they can absorb more than, you can say, almost twice as carbon as the entire world's forests can. So compared to the forest, they can actually act as carbon sinks, and that's why they can also be very, very important sources for fighting climate change. Not only this, we have seen that because of climate change, there have been an elevation in the amount of extreme weather things that we have seen. For example, the amount of destructions that cyclones or typhoons etc. have been doing, we have seen that over the years it has been increasing because of climate change. And these kind of areas like mangroves and swamps etc. in the coastal areas, they also act as barriers. They act as barriers because they will not let, let's say, tsunamis or cyclones etc. have the devastation or cause the devastation that they could cause if there were no wetlands available. And we have seen this. There are case studies that have been done in India and also, let's say, in Bangladesh, where we have seen that because of the destruction of many of these areas where wetlands have been removed, the mangroves have been removed, we have seen that the flooding has been more there. The problems associated with cyclones etc. have been more there. So we have seen that there is a clear-cut advantage that these provide against these kind of extreme weather features. Then they also provide sustainable livelihoods and products. And this is also very, very crucial, because when we look at, let's say, even fishing, for example. So even from the perspective of fishing, we see that there are more than almost 50 to 60 million people, sorry, not billion, million people who are actually dependent on fishing. And because of this commercial fishing in these kind of areas. So that's why they help in these kind of commercial activities as well. At the same time, we get, let's say, timber from here, we get medicinal plants from here. So they also become the source of all these areas. So that's why we have to understand that they have a very crucial importance for us, and they have been providing all these ecological services. So that's why understanding importance of wetlands is very, very important from this perspective, and that is why we are looking at all these Ramsar sites, and that's why Ramsar sites being or having very strict conventions and strict rules and regulations whenever something has been designated as a Ramsar site becomes very, very crucial for us from this perspective of saving the biodiversity, saving the environment, and looking at a sustainable future. So that's why from all these things, when you look at a comprehensive picture of why wetlands are important, you'll see that they have all these things. They do provide all these ecosystem services, and that is the reason why they are important. So from the perspective, if you look at from the perspective of loss of biodiversity, if at all that happens, then from that perspective, if you look at some of these figures, we see that why they become important, that 30% of land-based carbon is stored in the peatlands. Then for clean water, we know that they would be able to purify the sediments, purify the harmful chemicals and toxins, etc. And that's why they would be able to provide cleaner water. We know that a lot of people are dependent on these wetlands for their livelihood. So from that perspective also, this is very, very important. So all these things have to be kept in mind when it comes to the wetlands and their importance, and we need to understand their importance and why Ramsar sites are so very important for us. So from the perspective of current affairs, from the perspective of in general your prelims and mains examination, keep following any new news article or anything that you see with Ramsar sites or wetlands in general. So with this, I would end this lecture with you here itself. If you have any questions from whatever we have discussed, you can ask those questions. I am looking at some of the important questions that have been asked by you during the sessions, and then after that we'll end the session for today. So there is one question: what are the basic differences between mangroves and wetlands? They are not different. Mangroves are a kind of wetlands. There are multiple ways in which we can classify the wetlands, and mangroves are one of them. Ramsar sites are only wetlands or other lands are also considered? Ramsar sites specifically are for wetlands, for nothing else. If I join Byjus classes, current affairs are also covered. Of course it is covered. This is something that we do on a daily basis as well as a weekly basis, and also on a monthly basis. That daily lectures are being provided to you, daily notes are being provided to you, weekly webinars will also be conducted on current affairs. Current affairs based special lectures are also conducted, and also on a monthly basis you also get the magazines, etc. So there is a comprehensive manner in which we are covering everything. What kind of support do Ramsar Convention provides after declaring the wetland areas as Ramsar sites? Do they provide financial support for maintenance? Yes, they do provide every kind of services every kind of assistance. For example, any financial assistance that is required, everything will be discussed out according to the conventions in the Ramsar site, rules and regulations of the Ramsar Convention. Governments will also have to take care of these Ramsar sites in a very special manner. All the research and development will also take place in all these areas, so that's why from that perspective they are important. How wetlands help in purification of water? They help in purification of water from the perspective of the fact that when you look at these areas, these are the areas which will spread out the floodplains or the sediments that are being taken. Also the roots of the plants that grow in these areas, they would also help in filtering out the sediments, filtering out all the things which are unwanted, toxic, etc. So all these things also will be filtered out. So naturally, because they provide a pool, they help in sedimentation, and also the roots of the plants and the plants in general which are found here, they also help. What is wetland loss and wetland degradation? We have seen that because of human activities, there are a lot of areas of degradation. Overuse of the wetlands, overuse of the timber from wetlands, overuse of the species from wetlands, also overpopulation in these kind of areas, these kind of coastal areas, especially as I took the name of Sundarbans. We have seen that in whether West Bengal part or the Bangladesh part, we have seen that almost 25% of the wetlands have been destroyed there because of the way in which we have been using all the services, we have been using all the timber and the services, etc. from these wetlands. So that is what degradation basically is. Alright, so with this I have taken some of the most important questions that you had asked. With this I would like to end the lecture here. I hope that this session helps. Keep following the knowledge series for more important sessions related to all the static areas of your subjects. With this I'll take your leave. Thank you very much.